Big U facing 100 years, prosecutors say. Say you're not going out without a fight. Hey, they say no jumper started all of this. We're gonna we're gonna find out.
Jr. is heading to trial. Last month, he was named in a 43-county federal indictment, and this afternoon, he pleaded not guilty during his arraignment. Prosecutors accuse Henley of running a criminal enterprise involving murder, human trafficking, robbery, and extortion. They also say Henley, known as Big U, has ties to the notorious Rollin' 60s neighborhood Crips street gang. His trial is scheduled for May 20th.
All right, so it looks like we've got some Big U updates and news today, right? Big U was indicted on a 43-count indictment that was filed last month in Los Angeles that charged him with a single count of conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, along with multiple counts of robbery, extortion, wire fraud, embezzlement, and a few other crimes. Now, Big U, after he was arrested, he was arraigned, and in that arraignment, he pled not guilty to his charges. We watched a news clip at the beginning of this video about that. And so Big U has pretty much been waiting on trial. And in the meantime, he has been getting ready to go in front of the judge and argue for why he thinks he should get bond. That hearing is supposed to take place today. In fact, by the time this video comes out, it may have already taken place. And if Big U is successful, then he could be released from detention on bond. However, prosecutors are expected to argue that Big U will present a threat to the community, the victims, and witnesses if he's allowed to go free. And so that brings us into what we got today. They actually filed a memorandum in support of detention. And so y'all know I have a copy of it right here. You can see that the hearing date is April 22nd at 9:30 in the morning. And they've got Big U listed here as the defendant. Right? It says Eugene Henley Jr., which is Big U's real name, also known as Big U, also known as Unc, also known as Draws, also known as Hannibal, also known as Hannibal Muhammad, also known as Anybody Killer, also known as Dave Austin. God dang, bro. Anybody Killer is crazy. Getting into the document, we got the introduction here. It says, for decades, defendant Eugene Henley Jr. has put on a public facade masquerading as a reformed gang member and legitimate businessman whose only ambition was to better his community. But defendant wasn't helping Crenshaw, he was helping himself. In the shadows, defendant was secretly operating as a kingpin of a criminal enterprise that has ruled Los Angeles through violence, fear, and intimidation. Now, he seeks pre-trial release under the guise of his reform persona, even though his criminal activities have included murder, extortion, robbery, wire fraud, bank fraud, and human trafficking. The court should see through Big U's farce and keep him in custody for the safety of the community. To avoid custody, defendant will no doubt continue his double dealing as he did to celebrities and donors that he duped into believing they were helping young, underprivileged athletes chase their dreams, when in reality, they were unwittingly lining Big U's pockets as he embezzled donation after donation. Even in his short time in custody, he is up to his old tricks, once again trying to use some of these same celebrities for his personal gain. He has even suggested that he can manipulate the president of the United States into intervening in the case and dropping the charges, even as he simultaneously derisively refers to the president as the Orange Man while in custody. And I think what they're talking about there is Big U had a phone call while he was in prison, and I guess on that phone call he was talking about he might be able to manipulate Trump into giving him a pardon even if he's convicted. Anyways, it goes on. It says this court should not be fooled by the good deeds the defendant promises to accomplish if only he could close the detention doors behind him. The truth is that he will undoubtedly cause exponential harm to the case, to the community, and to others if he were released. Defendant should remain detained for the safety of the community, the victims and witnesses in this case. And then they got in parentheses here, in defendant's own words, if I would have had a problem with any man, the issue would have been resolved and he wouldn't be here, or I wouldn't be here. And that's a quote that they got from an intercepted call that Big U had on his wiretapped cell phone on December 31st of 2022, right? And we seen this quote in the original indictment that dropped. Anyways, back to the document. They say that he should remain detained for the safety of the community, the victims and witnesses in this case, and for the hope of some semblance of justice for the families of his victims. Indeed, with seemingly just hours of notice of his impending arrest, Big U has already destroyed valuable evidence, attempted to paint false narratives of his criminality in the public, and publicly condemned his enemies by name. He cannot be allowed to continue his obstructive path. And I think they're referring to the video he made right before he turned himself in that he posted over on Instagram. It says any supporters that Big U may offer as sureties will not protect the community. They did not save RW, which is Rayshawn Williams, the kid that Big U is accused of killing. They did not save RW, whom defendant murdered and abandoned in the desert. They did not save defendant's countless extortion and embezzlement victims whom Big U terrorized or tricked for years. They did not stop Big U from leaving Los Angeles in the midnight hours before his arrest or hurling thinly veiled threats in the lead up to his surrender. This court should have no trouble finding that Big U represents a danger and a risk of non-appearance, non-compliance with court orders that cannot adequately be mitigated through release conditions. With the utmost respect to pretrial services, pretrial supervision is not enough. Pretrial services is basically the people that are tasked with giving people that have been arrested on federal charges stipulations for their release, right? Like you have to check in with the officer, you have to maybe take drug tests or maybe wear an ankle monitor. Pretrial services is who does all that. So they say with respect to pretrial services, they cannot do enough to ensure that Big U isn't a danger or to ensure that he'll appear in court. It says for the sake of the community, Big U should remain in custody. Then it gets into the statement of facts, and then it's got bullet point A. It says defendant is a dedicated Rolling 60s member and leader of his own violent racketeering enterprise. It says Big U is an avowed and famed member of the Rolling 60s neighborhood Crips. As early as 1992, the Los Angeles Times described Big U as the leader of that gang, and little has changed as defendant has aged. As he states in many interviews when asked about any gang tattoos, he says, "It ain't on you, it's in you." And I can only think of one time that I remember hearing Big U say this, and it was during a DJ Vlad interview.
You know, I'm one of them guys who just here.
Just around.
Put it like this, it ain't on you, sometimes it's in you. You know what I mean? You kind of like, you walk a certain life and you live a certain life and you from a certain area. I like to tell dudes, I ain't from nowhere, I am there. That's what I am. You know what I mean? Like, it's where it's in your heart.
So it's got that in here. It says, indeed, Big U's gang ties run deep in his blood. Defendant has loudly recounted the terror he installs for years. In various interviews, Big U recounts selling narcotics, taking a percentage of all illegal activity in the neighborhood, leading the quote-unquote body snatchers, kidnapping crew, and eventually going to prison, where he claims he immediately paid off the guards and started to take a percentage of drug sales in the facility. Now, after an investigation spanning more than 4 years, defendant was charged with running the Big U enterprise from at least 2010 until his arrest, which often used the Rolling 60s as muscle in his criminal activities. Specifically, Big U often assisted by Rolling 60s and other members and associates of the Big U enterprise used intimidation, fear, violence, threats of violence, assault, extortion, and murder in the streets for power and profit. Through the media and his non-profit developing options, Big U portrayed himself as a neighborhood savior in drawing in donations and government resources intended to benefit at-risk youth, but which he oftentimes used to fund his lifestyle instead. Despite his life of crime, Big U never wanted to return to jail, so he went to great lengths to avoid law enforcement detection, tamper with witnesses, and otherwise obstruct justice. Then it's got some recent examples of defendants' acts or threats of violence, and the first thing they got listed is the murder of Rayshawn Williams, right? I'm not gonna go over this paragraph right here because it was all in my original video and the original indictment, but basically this kid was an artist of his. They had a little back and forth over whatever, I don't know what. I've heard different rumors, but they have a back and forth. Big U goes to Las Vegas, basically kills this kid and leaves him in the desert. That is the main point of the whole indictment. The second thing they got is robbery and extortion, and it says throughout the period of interception and before defendant was captured on audio and video recordings extorting victim one, both through a co-defendant, Sylvester Robinson, and personally In doing so, defendant Aaron Robinson frequently threatened violence against victim 1 if he failed to pay their fees. Those threats were not empty when victim 1 started to ignore Big U's calls demanding extortion payment. Defendant sent multiple armed robbers to victim 1's dispensary to rob him and then demanded $10,000 from the victim to prevent
That was the
future
one Luke
robberies.
Scandal was
And
talking
we
about,
did
huh?
read about this in the main indictment as well. Right, victim 1 was going through it. It says in multiple intercepted calls, defendant and his co-conspirators discussed even more robberies they were committing. Robinson also frequently told victim 1 about Big U's violence, including that Big U was the only OG still actively committing murders. And that's all something that they call on wiretap. It says in addition to the constant extortion of victim 1, defendant extorted victim 2 for $30,000 for a party thrown in Big U's honor in December of 2021. This is the guy that owned the club that Big U was throwing a birthday party at. When the victims requested to only pay $20,000, Big U responded with force, threatening, "I'll tear this bitch up. It won't be a club here no more." And then sending Robinson, another co-defendant Mark
Whoa.
Martin, and members of the Rolling 60s to confront victim 2 at his business and extort
Debo.
$30,000 from him. It says while the substantive extortion counts are currently limited to just some of those extortions of victim 1 and victim 2, they are not Big U's only extortions. For example, on October 19, 2021, Big U told victim 1 that he was taking over the extortion of another business owner. Then on November 7, 2022, on an intercepted call after yet another extortion victim stated that Big U had not fully paid the extortion victim for work on Big U's vehicle, Big U directed this Martin guy to call the extortion victim right now and stated that he would go out there and kill that dude. On February 14, 2023, on another intercepted call, Robinson told Big U that he had told quote-unquote Jew Boy that he owed the Big U Enterprise money and that they would allow a payment plan, but if he did not pay, they were going to shut this mother down. And then it's got bullet point 3, power to direct violence. It says, making him that much more dangerous, Big U holds power over others threatening and committing violence. For example, on November 23, 2022, on an intercepted call, Big U said that he can pay 3 people $50 each to beat someone up and described paying people to quote-unquote mess up a store that was refusing to provide Big U a discount. On April 17, 2023, on another intercepted call, Big U directed an individual to deliver a message to another marijuana dispensary owner that Big U said of him and that he had uffed with the wrong guy. And it's got C, despite a prior 23-year sentence for armed robbery, Big U stayed armed. It said since at least July 20th, 1992, defendant has been prohibited from even possessing firearms based on his felony convictions for second-degree robbery with a firearm, conspiracy, and drug trafficking, for which he received a 23-year prison sentence. Upon his release from prison, he nevertheless continued to use firearms, like when he murdered Rayshawn Williams and directed others to use firearms, like when they robbed victim 1's dispensary. Throughout this investigation, recordings corroborated that Big U consistently was armed. On October 22nd, 2022, Robinson told victim 1 that Big U and Robinson would be attending an after party at a club that victim 1 was promoting and that a pat down is out because Big U would be in attendance, implying that the defendant was armed. Pretty much saying when Big U shows up, he ain't getting patted down. On an intercepted call a month later, Big U told an incarcerated individual that anyone coming at him better come correct because Big U always had 2 blowers, which is firearms. On January 3rd, 2023, on an intercepted call, Big U described to an incarcerated individual that he was tooling up with firearms to travel to a Crips neighborhood because we are the most arrogant, bougie, self-righteous motherfuckers on planet Earth. On April 1st, 2023, on another intercepted call, Big U asked someone to grab Big U's blower, which he left on the ground in a blue sweatshirt in front of a tire. Then it's got D, defendant is not only a physical danger, but a financial danger too. It says Big U's crimes against victims are not confined to only violence. He spent decades creating a facade of a reformed gang member who seeks to build rather than destroy his community. So, disguised, Big U used that persona primarily to take from the very community that he claims to help. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowed from charitable donors and government programs to Big U's Developing Options bank account. Almost immediately, he siphoned off as much of the the money into his own personal bank account as he could. Big U got richer and richer off of his fraud, like his extortions and robberies, owning multiple homes, driving a Mercedes, taking lavish trips, and shopping for luxuries like a $30,000 necklace. The money taken from donors and taxpayers' pockets will never
Oh,
find
and they
their
got you with a
intended
Ponzi scheme,
benefactors,
brother.
the at-risk youth and
Shit.
children of Crenshaw. That damage cannot be undone. But Big U's success in deceiving politicians, celebrities, and community activists, as well as the public at large, further militates against his release back into that community as he attempts to fund an expensive defense. So they're saying that because he defrauded people before he got locked up, and now he's got this big case he's going to have to fight if they let him out, he's probably going to do it again to try to pay for them expensive attorneys. And then it says defendant is fluent in obstruction. It says all of it may be founded on crimes, but Big U built a charmed life following his 23-year sentence for armed robbery. He does not want to give it up and uses obstruction frequently to avoid that. The destruction of surveillance footage, use of encrypted applications like FaceTime, demands to meet in person to avoid law enforcement intercepting communication, use of multiple phones and cars, orders
He
to not speak
encrypted
to law enforcement,
FaceTime?
and chastising of any perceived or suspected cooperators are detailed in the charging instruments. A few are also highlighted here. It says, even when the criminal charges were not against Big U personally, Big U instructed a victim's relative that the victim was to go to the lineup, tell him to pick the wrong person to insulate Big U's associate from the charges. A master manipulator, defendant told another associate to influence the media for his lawsuit against law enforcement. He should show both positive and negative parts of his life, wear glasses, and say that he was working with Big U's charity developing options, even though he was not. On multiple intercepted calls, Big U talked about beating up or at least breaking a witness's jaw, and while defendant may claim other reasons for feuding with that witness, this court should protect him. I wonder if they're talking about WAC 100 here. If y'all remember, when I read the original indictment on this channel, Big U had threatened to break WAC 100's jaw like 20 separate times on intercepted phone calls. Right here, they're saying that he talked about beating up or at least breaking a witness's jaw. And while Big U may claim other reasons for feuding with that witness, this court should protect him. Remember in the original indictment, they pretty much called WAC 100 Big U's blood counterpart. Interesting stuff. I wonder if this witness that they're talking about is WAC. But anyways, it says, after fleeing with his phones in the hours before his scheduled arrest in this case in an attempt to intimidate and dissuade anyone from cooperating with law enforcement or otherwise reporting information about Big U posted publicly on Instagram naming his co-defendants and known opponents, instructing the public not to associate with them and claiming that if they did, they were not black. In an attempt to poison the jury pool, defendant posted on Instagram claiming racial profiling and blaming his co-defendants and opponents for the charges that were filed against him in this federal criminal complaint. And then it's got this section, the legal standard. It says a defendant must be detained pending trial where.
So I guess if you do say that, you taint the jury pool because you can't get anybody who feels the same way. Like, oh yeah, they only picked him because he's black. Oh, that's smart.
No condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the appearance of the person as required and the safety of any other persons in the community. Detention is thus appropriate for Big U, who is either a danger to the community or a risk of non-appearance. And then they got some case law stated here, United States versus Matamidi, where it went over the Bail Reform Act, which mandates that an individual evaluation guided by the factors articulated in this law right here will determine if somebody will be released, and those are the nature and seriousness of the offense charged, including whether the offense is a crime of violence, the weight of the evidence against the defendant's character, physical and mental condition, family and community ties, past conducts, history relating to any drug or alcohol abuse, and their criminal history, and then the nature and seriousness of the danger to any person or the community that would be posed if somebody was to be released. And it says that Big U should remain detained because he is a risk of non non-appearance and a danger to the community. It says the 43 federal charges against Big U, the damning
Damn.
evidence against him, his dangerous history and characteristics, and the risk to numerous specific individuals in the community at large if he were to be released, all support his detention. And then it goes over those factors and how they pertain to Big U, which we pretty much covered by reading the indictment and reading this document. We can see how he fits in all four of those categories. It's even got some case law in here for how other criminals similar to Big U were handled in this situation. In this case, United States versus Notorious, who was a member of the mafia. They know that he had also made threats to kill, that he was a danger, that he had a total commitment to a life of crime. That defendant ended up having his bail denied. They got this other one, United States versus Cazares. I guess this guy was involved in a RICO indictment where he was also charged with extortion, wire fraud, witness tampering, and other crimes similar to Big U.
They put like examples of similar criminals to the current criminals. That's I didn't know that. That's crazy.
And in his case, he was detained with no bail based on his activities as well as the activities of those he supervised and controlled. And then they got a few more cases. And again, they're doing all of that to try their best to show that these people are just like Big U and these people weren't released on bond. And they do that to establish how the Bail Reform Act mandates that Big U remain in detention on those 4 points that we touched on a minute ago. And then right here in this part, there is a very interesting sentence. It says, moreover, as currently charged, defendant Big U faces a statutory maximum of well over 600 years. Even
600 years is crazy. Bro. And see, I've never understood that. Like, I get they got to tally up all the shit that you did, right? But why not just say life? 600 years, it's just like, nigga, you ain't got a chance. You ain't got a chance in hell. Like,
discounting defendant's criminal history due to its age as currently charged, Big U faces a likely guidelines range of life in prison based on a total offense level of 43 for one count alone. The severity of the potential penalties involved augments defendant's risk of non-appearance. And then we get to the conclusion. It says if the court wants to know how the defendant will conduct himself on pretrial release, it need look no further than the recordings documenting Big U's conduct and threats throughout this investigation. With everything to lose, including the immense goodwill he fraudulently procured from the community and his city, Big U still told anyone who dared to ask that he was a killer, and he proved that he was a killer. Because Big U is both a danger to the community and a risk of non-appearance, should the case not go his way, this court should permanently detain Big U pending trial. And I'm not gonna lie, this brief in support of detention for Big U is probably going to be approved. They did a very good job putting all the case law together and painting the picture of this case. It's going to be very, very, very hard for Big U to counter any of these points, especially since a lot of this evidence that they have is wiretap conversations, even some video recordings of him committing these crimes and people that were up underneath him committing these crimes. I mean, it's going to be hard for him to prove that he's not a danger or that he wouldn't run, but that's the document. That's what we got. Like I said, Big U was scheduled this morning at 9:30 to find out if he was going to get bond. I got to look here in a minute to see if that has been approved or not, but I can pretty much with certainty go ahead and tell you that Big U is not going to be released. Anyways, that's what we got. That's it for the video. Y'all got to let me know what y'all think about it in the comments down below.
Yikes. 600 years is crazy. That's wild. But hey, kids, don't do crime. And if you made it this far, don't forget to put a 7 in the comments. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video so you can help the channel grow. And if you like that one, you'll probably like this one or this one down here. These two. Click either or, and I'll see you in the next video. Schmooches.
We gon' leave here what we came with. Nintendo 64, we ain't switching on the same shit. Me and Peso on the track, sound like I'm speaking Spanglish. Send my